Reality Bytes with Jules Marino 2. Jules Marino was an expert in art and animation. He was a world-renowned artist from cartoons to film. Jules was a mostly bald 60-something Italian, tallish, thinly built man. He wore thick gold wire-rimmed spectacles that made him stand out. He wore jeans and a sports coat. Sometimes a white sports coat to stand out as an artist. Likewise, he wore a fedora and carried a bright umbrella at times. While I believe much of what Jules said and wore and did was to stand out as an extrovert, it may have been also just that he loved wild and eccentric styles, so much so that he adopted them wholesale completely. Jules was an amazing artist and animator with an incredible background. Jules Marino had an impressive resume and artist reel. He was the lead artist and journeyman for the animated TV series Fat Albert. He was one of the main artists and animators for the original TV series He-Man Masters of the Universe, a cartoon series. He worked on numerous Hanna-Barbera cartoons and traveled the world to work with animation houses and luminaries globally. Jules even worked on blockbuster movie animations like the mixed cartoon reality movie Cool World. His work was so popular that his son was able to sell drawings and sketches of Jules' work at school. And he had an endless customer base excited to get original materials from their favorite TV shows. Jules was the real deal. Incredible talent and a down-to-earth, good guy personality. Jules was an animation and 2D art god. Jules was not a 3D artist, though, at all. After years of effort, Jules became competent in 3D art and some 3D art animation, but he was never great at it, and it was a pale shadow of his 2D great skills. Sometimes I wondered if Jules made the right decision transitioning from 2D TV and film to 3D video games. In retrospect, I believe Jules was correct that video games would be a fantastic future for art and animation. However, he was a little too early to leverage his talents in the blossoming game industry, and moving from 2D to 3D might have been just too much for him too late in his career. Jules was successful, regardless of entering the game industry's tech and being 3D blind. He overcame his ignorance and was able to do work in 2D and 3D for composition, modeling, lighting, and animation. He was a master of his craft, even if challenged in 3D. I held great respect for Jules, seeing him learn so much new technology and processes, and even ways of thinking. And he was well over 60 years of age at that time. Jules was an impressive man. Jules' ex-wife wanted to take him for all that he was worth, and she had secured the Chicago condo they owned along with their car and furniture in settlement. In other words, Jules was able to split whatever cash they had and was responsible for half of any debt they had. But Jules was also responsible for spousal support for half the term of their marriage, which accounted for all the money that they had saved and then some. He was facing the outcome that he would owe more money to his wife than they had at the time of getting a divorce. He settled taking all debt in lieu of having to come up with more cash to pay his ex-wife to get divorced. That was crazy sounding. It seemed crazy to Jules that his wife could cheat on him and file for divorce only for him to lose his home, his car, and all money, and assume all credit card debt and car payments for the future in the car that she would legally own. The only thing he did not have left was that he didn't have to keep paying the mortgage on the condo, because the wife had total ownership of that in the settlement. After his divorce was filed, Jules left the United States to work with a cartoon animation house abroad in South Korea, then another one in Germany, and he kept moving to London, all over Europe. While Jules enjoyed being the famous American animator abroad, he missed his home country. He wanted to return, but it had been many, many years, nearly a decade since he had left the States. Having rebuilt a small nest egg working internationally, Jules booked his return trip to the United States. He planned to reboot his life in America once more. Upon passing the security gate, 2 police officers approached Jules and informed him that he was under arrest, and they read him his Miranda rights. He was really under arrest for tax evasion. Yeah, Jules did not file any tax forms while he worked internationally. He did not think it was necessary. He was wrong. The Internal Revenue Service, IRS, is finicky about filing a tax return every year, no matter where you live. As a factoid, the IRS has agreements with most countries that US taxpayers must pay the higher tax of whatever country they reside in or the United States, period. In other words, if you live outside the United States and they have a higher tax bracket, you pay them. If you live in the United States, you pay the United States. If you live outside the United States and the United States has a higher tax bracket, you still pay the United States. The IRS did not want to put Jules in jail, though, but rather intended to scare him into paying the money that they felt he owed. The IRS informed Jules that he owed almost $200,000 in back taxes, resulting from the sale of his condo and liquidation of stocks right after he left the country. Apparently, his ex-wife sold the condo and their stocks and kept the cash, but left the tax due on the account's owner, Jules Marino. It was a sneaky move by his ex-wife's lawyer, and one that ruined Jules' life for the remainder of his time. The IRS offered a deal to Jules. They would garnish his wages. Simple as that. Alas, though, it was so much that he could barely afford a 1-bedroom apartment an hour away in a dicey hood. It was wrong. But if he left the country now, he would be formally absconding and would become an international wanted felon. He really didn't have a choice. A year later, the California State Franchise Tax Board contacted Jules and informed him that he likewise owed them over $100,000, resulting from complicated Illinois-California real estate and divorce tax agreements. None of it really mattered. The state tax was just more tax piled onto Jules' nearly impossible federal tax debt. It was all impossible anyway for him to pay it off, probably in his entire lifetime. And to top off Jules' tax misfortune, it is not allowed to declare bankruptcy to get out of your taxes if you are employable. Jules was screwed by his ex-wife and the IRS. He would work the rest of his life to pay against the debt that he would never pay off, and he would have correspondingly low quality of life forevermore because of it. It was obvious to me that wicked people can do horrible things to good people, to kind people. Jules did not deserve what happened to him, and yet it happened to him nonetheless. We had gone to the Consumer Electronics Show, CES, in Chicago, Illinois once. A video game developer rented a pub downtown and invited everyone from Atari to join them. They hoped to score a contract, and so we were wining and dining with them. And our team hoped that they might ingratiate themselves with us because they were also, we thought, good developers. But who knows? That's what wining and dining is for. Jules dressed to the nines, as the saying goes. He wore his usual thick-rimmed gold spectacles. He wore wingtip shiny white leather shoes, bright white flowing slacks, white shirt, and a super bright sports coat. And of course, he had a white fedora. If that was not enough of a bright and noticeable sight, Jules donned two huge, overlapping golden necklace and golden belt buckles holding an off-white belt. Jules did not have a suit vest, but was otherwise insanely dapper and well-dressed, over the top. He smoked a lot, and so Jules asked Doug Brandon and I to join him outside, where he could smoke, from the pub. The pub was downtown, in the bad side of town. Jules thought it was prudent for us to go as a group outside, since smoking section was technically in an alleyway, near the entrance. It was maybe a half a cigarette down, and some bum approached us, and he asked for a handout. Well, Doug was with us, and he had his raspy voice, and he said, "Get lost! We're busy." Well, the bum turned into a mugger very quickly, and he demanded, "I asked for money! Give me some money!" He threatened. Jules did not hesitate, and he looked at that guy and he exclaimed loudly, "You get out of here, you idiot!" He yelled so loud that everyone up and down the alley heard, even inside the pub. The bum looked agitated and unsure what his next move would be. Should he attack us? Should he flee? Should he wait and see what we do? He stood there waiting and thinking. Then a big black guy ran up to him panicking, and he screamed, "Dude, that's the Godfather! That's the Godfather! It's the effing Godfather! You gonna die, you motherfucker!" The black man ran down the road screaming, "The Godfather is here! The Godfather is here! He's back! He taken the city back!" The would-be mugger, seeing the panic of this huge, deadly-looking black man, embraced the myth that Jules was, in fact, the Godfather, returned to retake Chicago, and he fled in fear himself. What a fiction. And people believed it. I could only presume drugs and alcohol-enfeebled minds were prone to believe such madness. Maybe that made them impressionable locals, prone to fantasies of mobsters and unrest. It was nuts. Doug and I could not fathom how Jules could be so loud and commanding and boisterous, given the potential of being injured if not murdered right there in an alleyway entrance by a seedy downtown Chicago bar. But that is what happened, and it was fortunate that Jules was insanely mistaken by the brain-addled denizens as the Godfather to take back Chicago, like a TV show. Later on, Jules provided a clue as to why he dressed so standout dapper with bright clothing and dazzling bling jewelry. In his past, he grew up in Chicago area, in the hood. He explained that it was paramount to project confidence and authority in the hood, or any time you are threatened. Showing weakness, he said, or fleeing, tells the lion to attack. Standing your ground tall and wide, even threatening back, he asserted, almost always scares off potential attackers. It worked out in this case, thank goodness. I was out of my element, and so apparently it was good to have the Godfather on my side. Jules recounted a highlight of his hood life. As a young man, he had a job delivering packages from local fine jewelry retailers to buyers in unmarked sealed boxes. He admitted that he believed there might be other things in those boxes, but his job was just to deliver them, as a legitimate delivery man does. And so, that is what he did. He delivered the suspicious, unmarked boxes to their recipients without tampering or questioning anything about them. Jules looked a little ashamed of a time when he compromised his integrity. He always valued honor and holding to his promises as your word. I surmise that much like I rationalized my pirating games as a youth, this was Jules' version of piracy. I had no choice because I had no money to buy games, and thus it was not taking anything from anyone because they were digital, so I reasoned. Jules did not have money, and thus he needed to earn it. and the only job he could get was a dubious delivery gig. It may have been legit, or may not have been legit. He actually never knew, and so could only presume that it was legitimate. By not investigating, he gave himself plausible deniability, legally and for his own integrity. Of course, that argument could be countered as a mind trick rationalization. Jules' apologetic, guilty expression made Doug and I think that he believed there were definitely other things than jewelry and diamonds in the packages that he delivered, even if he never investigated. Jules' package delivery job for fine jewelry and diamond retailers represented a risky service, transporting high-value content throughout the Chicago area. Moreover, the buyers for these diamonds and jewelry were invariably in dicey neighborhoods and often to unsavory people. His employers advised Jules to carry a pistol with him in the event of a conflict or a robbery. After all, he was delivering expensive merchandise, well worth being mugged for. But Chicago did not allow carrying a pistol around with you unless you were approved by the city police. You had to go into the police department and get a special concealed carry permit to have a firearm. Jules did not have any kind of gun permit, nor did he even own a gun for that matter. Well, he set out to address both issues. He needed a gun and a license to carry it around. Jules' first challenge was obtaining a firearm. Well, that turned out to be quite easy for Jules. He just went down to a pawn shop and asked about pistols, whereupon an array of handguns was laid out in front of him to choose from. It was that easy. Ask, and ye shall receive. Firearms. Jules did not know a lot about the guns, and so looked for the most intimidating looking pistol that he could stick in his pocket or hang below his arm. It had to be invisible to the public, or of course, it would not be concealed. He saw a black revolver with a mahogany pistol grip. It was a little black devil with bulging rotating chamber revealing from its barrel end that bullets were there, seeing their tips. It was loaded and ready to shoot a victim. It was intimidating. And it had enough heft to be an adequate cudgel like brass knuckles. Jules picked up the revolver and said, "This is it. Scary as hell to whip this out and whack someone on the head and tell them you could kill him. Yeah, this will do great. Is there anything you can tell me about it?" he asked. The pawn shop owner knew a lot about firearms. He seemed proud of how much he knew and was compelled to explain in great detail all the pistols and their pros and cons. Jules never expected a history and capability lesson on pistols, especially from a pawn shop merchant. The revolver Jules was keen on was a Smith & Wesson Model 36, 38 caliber, known as the Chief's Special. The Chief's Special was called that because it was unveiled in October 1950 at a conference for International Association of Chiefs of Police. It did not have the stopping power of the big, higher caliber guns, but it looked intimidating, and it could be a surprise to anyone assaulting someone. Jules bought the mahogany-handled black Chief Special revolver with cash. No ID, no background check, nothing. Choose the gun, pay for it, walk out with the gun along with complimentary bullets in the pistol chamber, ready to go. And he was even given an extra full box of 38 rounds for the gun. Next, Jules needed a concealed carry permit so that he could carry that gun legally should he ever be stopped. In fact, he could carry it anywhere with a concealed carry permit. But this was less straightforward. He went to the police department and filled out the paperwork. Later, he was asked to visit the police station to interview with an approving officer. The officer that Jules met told him that Jules had no justification as a delivery boy to carry a weapon of any kind. Jules' argument that he was carrying high-value merchandise was not sufficient. The officer told Jules to use an armed transport service and not some boy to run packages around with a gun. As Jules left the officer, he called to Jules. Jules came back to him and he said, I love photography, but on my salary, nice cameras and lenses are way beyond what I can afford. There's this amazing Canon Flex 35mm camera. It would just make my day, I get all positive about things when I can take good photos. Jules recognized that this was probably a request for a bribe. So he returned to his employers to tell them that he had failed to get a pistol permit, but that he would still deliver the goods. He said that he might even take a pistol without a permit in the very bad areas. But his employers demanded that Jules uphold the law. He thought that was a little ironic given what he suspected was being delivered in those packages. But again, maybe the packages were genuinely legit and contained jewelry and diamonds. There were a lot of diamond and jewelry buying going on, though, in the city of Chicago. Apparently very high consumption items. And sometimes the same people bought more jewelry. The head jeweler told Jules to go out and buy the camera that was specified, wrap it up, and put it on the officer's desk. Then return to him later and ask how his photography is going, and tell him your employer asked that you reapply for the permit. Well, Jules followed his employer's directions to the word. The officer smiled when Jules returned and answered that he had recently acquired his dream camera, the Canon Flex 35mm, and that he was having a great time taking photos. Jules' concealed carry permit was approved and issued to him right then. And the officer was happy with his newfound camera. Jules was in business, delivering packages armed with his chief's special pistol. It was like money burning a hole in his pocket. He wanted to show it off and use it, but it was a gun, and he had to be responsible. One of Jules' pastimes was going to the movie theater. During one movie, a group of rude, obnoxious hoodlums sat in the seat row in front of him, and a buddy that was with him said, "I can't hear the movie." They talked and joked and laughed incessantly in front of Jules and his friend. Jules asked that the people in front of him keep it down so that he and his friend could watch the movie without further disruption. Jules swears that he was respectful in how he asked them to be quiet. However, they had no interest, he explained, and that they scoffed at him, and they resumed their chatter, even louder, to make a point. But Jules had a pistol, and he whipped it out and he slammed it alongside ear of one of the chatterbox hoodlums. "Shut the F up, you piece of crap." Whoa, Jules told us that he was a lot more direct and violent. Yeah, apparently very violent. Jules said that he trained the barrel of his chief special on the next guy after leaving the first one with a ringing and aching ear and head. And he asked, "Do you want more? When someone asks you to be nice and be quiet, you listen to them, okay? You effing do it. You got me? You got it?" The previously defiant, boisterous hoodlums groveled and pleaded not to be shot, and they apologized profusely. Jules admitted that he felt immensely powerful in that moment, and he was the authority. It was a feeling he had not had before. He also realized that there were a lot of witnesses, and that he likely broke several laws, but it was also very dark, so he dashed out of the emergency exit. Jules suffered no consequences from his movie theater pistol whipping experience. It emboldened him. He told us to be a bit of a gangster during his younger Chicago years. That experience made him feel powerful, not just in the moment, but for months and months. He never shot anyone, but he admitted that he pulled the gun on several people on a few occasions, but only to get out of binds, he declared. Well, there it was. Jules had the Godfather in him all along. The Godfather just needed his time, his moment to come out and retake Chicago. And Jules was a great storyteller. Let's fast forward to Jules' sunset years. He soft retired working for an extremely wealthy, allegedly billionaire that founded an art college on a ranch of his out in Colorado mountains. He built out a fancy campus to support hundreds of students, but targeted to have only 50 or so students at any given time, so it was spacious. The college was not intended to make money. It was intended to be the billionaire's playpen, complete with playmates and activities and events and guests. It was a grand adventure for the billionaire, and Jules was his star teacher. He was enamored with Jules and his professional and personal life stories. Jules was fun, charismatic, articulate, and exciting. His energy was contagious. He was a perfect centerpiece to the unique billionaire's art college in Colorado. I heard that Jules loved it there, and that I never heard from him again because of it. And then there was SGI Simon the Unlikable. Simon the Unlikable was a smooth-talking, snake oil salesman personality, but he was a business expert, to give him credit. Thin and unremarkable in appearance, Simon wore plain, young professional clothing most of the time. Jeans with collared, non-button polo-styled shirts, and occasionally a sports coat to look professional. Like I said, Simon came across as a smooth-talking, snake oil salesman. People did not trust him on first impression, but he was tenacious. He would attach to an idea or a person like a barnacle and never let go. His persistence overcame most people's initial off-put feelings. While his integrity was flexible and ethics were situational, he was clever, if not quite smart. He knew how people thought and what motivated them. He understood leverage and manipulation like a science. He was strategic in his planning. Were it not for his sleazy demeanor, Simon would have been an unstoppable force, like Steve Jobs at Apple Computer. But Simon was unlikable. Simon was an unlikable Steve Jobs. At one point, Simon pitched to Doug, Jules, and me the idea of creating a company called Reality Bytes. Bytes being spelled like a computer byte, B-Y-T-E-S, Reality Bytes. He said that we should make that company and take it public in a year, maybe two, because the home video game market was exploding. He argued that our resumes would make investors salivate and that he could pitch like no one else. Simon dreamed that we would be multi-millionaires in less than 5 years. The dream of being independent once more, but with huge resources to make the most amazing games that I wanted, sounded almost too good to be true. Well, things never worked out the way people say. I had been betrayed and hurt by so many people, even my own mother. And Simon was sleazy, and he was a great salesman. I wondered if I was being suckered into a con. Was I being bamboozled? I was not alone. Jules and Doug also had misgivings about Simon, and were especially concerned about entering a business agreement with him, with a snake oil salesman. We all worried he might get us caught up in some fraud or a deal that we could not get out of. Maybe we'd go in trouble or go to prison. We had no idea. We did not trust Simon. I had been involved with the Chinese mafia Tong, unintentionally. I had seen horrible abuses intentionally and unintentionally in my life. I was not about to walk into the jaws of threat and risk when my spidey senses and lizard brain were telling me not just to walk away, but to run away. In the end, we all abandoned the idea of reality bites. In hindsight, I do wonder maybe we should have pursued it. There are pivotal decisions like pursuing or not pursuing reality bites, or interviewing for a shoe-in job at a newly formed game group in Microsoft as Vice President of Engineering. Life's key moment, pivotal decisions, may seem small at the start, but they have huge, outsized impact and effect on your life decades later. I have often said people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but they underestimate what they can do in 3 years. Setting the right initial course for a long journey is critical because over distance, small errors amplify. The destination may be missed entirely with a small course error over a long journey. And even with the right upfront course, it is critical to formalize waypoints to reassess and course correct in case you drifted. I guess in the end, maybe my life would have been wildly different had I pursued reality bites, or being Microsoft Games Vice President of Engineering so long ago, or perhaps neither would have worked out and things would have been worse. Not knowing whether my trajectory would have been different or not had become a philosophical idea for me over life. I did not realize then how decisions in life can be so impactful in the near and long term. I do know now what decisions we make and what we do makes a difference. Another wrong prognostication that I had made, I convinced myself that the era of contract game development was fading in preference to bigger internal corporate game development. That was why I sought employment at Atari Games in the first place. It became apparent that I was wrong, however, about contract development fading. In fact, contract development was blossoming into a much larger, huge opportunity for freelancers to grow into huge, highly profitable development studios. But I became an employee, perhaps another mistake.